For the past 10 years, at the conclusion of NBC Nightly News, live from Studio 1A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City, Lester Holt, the iconic African-American news anchor, signs off his daily 30-minute segment with these now iconic words. Please take care of yourself and each other. Now, some of you may recall this phrase from the once respected 1990s Jerry Springer show. When the former mayor of Cincinnati popularized the phrase long before the show devolved into the now legendary circus of deceit, of fights, paternity tests, and public shaming, Jerry did offer sound advice at the close of his show. Take care of yourself and each other. How ironic this phrase, take care. It's one of those idioms in the English language where the literal meaning doesn't precisely match the symbolic meaning. Care comes from the Old English word karu, which means grief, anxiety, mourning, worry. And take has the connotation of taking by force, perhaps something that does not belong to you, to seize, to capture, to remove in the hardest, most forceful kind of ways, especially without permission, but to take care isn't about worry or hardness. To take care is really about love, about softness, gentleness, kindness, about shelter and protection, and the grief and anxiety, and the mourning and the worry. We might experience something else when we take care of ourselves and one another. We might experience something soft, something gentle and intimate, something kind and embracing, something empathetic, something loving. When we feel loved and lovable and safe, take care of yourself and one another. And we know these words are easier said than done, especially right now, as we live in this age of decay and devastation and destruction, when there is this erosion of the systems of care that have held us for so long, when there is this destruction and devastation of a social safety net, as we watch in real time as things go from bad to worse, in the dismantling of our collective system of care that previously has said to the most vulnerable, to the refugees, to the migrant, to the poor, to the brokenhearted, that there is safety for you, there is help for you. Seems like a very few electeds, particularly at the upper echelon of governance, seem to care at all. Rather stunning, this blitzkrieg, this war, this rapid assault on the poor and the marginalized and the most vulnerable upon all of us, because it seems that no matter gender or race or status or creed, it seems like no one actually is safe. And it seems like the resounding words that are coming from the Trumpian United States of America is that you don't belong here. You're not safe here. No one cares for you or will care for you. Words like diversity, equity, and inclusion are outlawed and replaced by government efficiency. A new form of empire takes hold, but is but a remake of the same old empire, the old capitalist trope where a person's worth is measured by their economic output, their economic value, such that when you are too costly, you're discarded and disposed and deported. America's original sin of racism has always been circumscribed by a form of capitalism that reduces human beings to chattel, to property, to producers, nothing more. In the midst of the suffering and the pain and the carelessness of an uncaring system, we perhaps today might encounter a word from God that offers some glimmer of hope, some glimmer of a capacity, a vision for us to imagine again differently how we might care for one another, that we might take care of ourselves and one another. These are the words that come to us from 1 Peter chapter 5, in particular, verse 7. Cast your cares and worries and anxieties upon the one who cares for you as we care for one another. 1 Peter is such a wonderful invitation that we hear. It invites us into a new sense of belonging because, Peter, he's an awesome character that gives us insight in how we might be more deeply human, more deeply empathetic during these times. Peter's an interesting person because he's rather human, beautifully awesome and beautifully broken. He's human like us. He gets so many things right and also gets so many things wrong. And from this place of humanity, we might understand more deeply the words that come from his letter to these early Christians at the end of the first century BCE. A little context about Peter, which helps us to understand what comes before us today as we are invited to take care, as he writes in 1 Peter chapter 5. Right, Peter is one of those interesting apostles who's on the one hand called the Rock, and on the other hand, Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, Peter, Satan." Right, you will remember that at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, and he's performing miracles throughout Judea and Galilee. He's making those who want to perceive God's new thing, he's giving them new sight. He's taking illnesses and healing them, and he's drawing one another into community. So Jesus, at the beginning of his ministry, he begins to ask his followers, his closest disciples, Peter among them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they respond that some say you are Moses reincarnated. Some say you are Elijah, the new reincarnated prophet. And Jesus responds to the disciples and says, "That's all great, but who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, and he gets it right. He gets the gold star. He says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God." Jesus says, "Yes, you've got it. You have been following, you've been listening, and you see that the anointedness that is upon me as the Son of God also rests upon you who are called to follow the Son of God and called anointed, or called beloved." And then a couple of years later, we know the story as we begin to approach Lent and make our way to the cross, that the very one who gets it so right, who gets the gold star, who is shining and illumined, also gets it so very wrong. Jesus prophesies that Peter, one of the closest, would deny him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And in fact, as Jesus is being abandoned by some of the closest friends, Peter is among them. So on the one hand, we see as we turn to 1 Peter chapter 5, that on the one hand, Peter gets it so right, and on the other hand, Peter, so wonderful, so loving, so human, gets it wrong. Peter is the rock, considered to be the first apostle, the first bishop of Rome, even the first pope of the church. His writings aren't as extensive as the Apostle Paul, who we are much more familiar with, but his two letters, Peter's two letters, are essential, I would argue, to the shape of the New Testament and how we might be for each other, this community of care. Because while Paul, whose writings are more extensive, did not know Jesus in the flesh, Peter, who was one of Jesus' companions, followers, disciples, has a unique insight as a follower of Christ into the heart of the Savior. Enter his letter, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. I send you some advice, Peter says, as an elder, as a leader, to you, the leaders, the elders, the community. He says in 1 Peter chapter 5, there is deep suffering, and the devil, the adversary, roams the earth like a lion seeking someone to devour. Be sober. Be deliberate. Be grounded. Be watchful. Stand against the devil. Stand against suffering. Stand against injustice. And be connected, Peter writes, to each other, to God, to yourself, and take care. In fact, take good care. Please take care of yourself and each other, says the Apostle Peter, and cast your worries upon God. Because to cast our worries upon God is to cast our worries upon neighbor. Because to be in the community of God is to be in relationship with God's chosen, God's anointed, God's people. Stitch together that which binds us together, he says, in a world that is trying ever so fiercely to devour and tear us apart. He says, who do we care about? What do we care about? And what are we going to do about it? What do we care about? Who do we care about? What are we going to do about it? Last week in his fantastic sermon, Pastor Kyle began to unpack our congregational read for Black History Month. We're reading Young and Social, we're reading in Wednesday Book Club, we're reading as individuals in our congregation, James Cone, 2011 monumental text, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. In this text, as Pastor Kyle brought before us last week, James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology, asked a provocative question to one of his elders, as Cone is an elder, the father of Black theology for us. In this text, James Cone asked the question, how is it possible that Reinhold Niebuhr, a towering social ethicist and public intellectual of the 20th century, said little and wrote nothing, wrote virtually nothing about the lynching tree, about Black bodies hanging from poplar trees? How did he avoid the problem of the color line is the question that Cone asks of Niebuhr, asks of Christianity. How is it possible for an ethicist, the one who is teaching and leading on doing the right thing, how do we show up as Christians in realistic fashion. He was a Christian realist known for, but how do we make practical, real change? How is it possible, he asked, that Niebuhr does not respond to that which was not hidden in plain sight, but visible in plain sight? This simple answer to this provocative and piercing question is, quite simply, Reinhold Niebuhr did not care. Though a brilliant theologian and ethicist, ultimately Niebuhr lacked the empathy and the compassion to suffer with the suffering of black people. And that Niebuhr himself was shaped by a gaze, what Toni Morrison in Playing in the Dark describes as a white gaze that did not extend to black people. Unwilling, unable, then Niebuhr is to carry his cross to confront the lynching tree. Cone argues that the cross is not a spiritualized historical symbol, but rather a modern-day happening with real-life material consequences. As such, Cone argues that Niebuhr fails to universalize the Christian message because he does not see the suffering of black people. The cross of the Roman Empire and the lynching tree of the American Empire, yes, separated temporally by 2,000 years, were kissing cousins, says Cone, such that to see the injustice of the cross of Christ demands us to see the injustice of the lynching tree, of black people, of vulnerable people, of so-called disposable, deportable, dispensable people. Cone goes one step further and says, this precisely is the sickness of whiteness, which has very little to do simply with, we're not talking just about skin color, we're talking about an approach, an apparatus that says it is okay to ignore and to not see, or to see whom I choose, and then to ignore and render invisible those who do not fit into the economic model of productivity, of efficiency. Whiteness, with all of its talk of efficiency and production, obscures the truth of Christianity, because whiteness blesses the blatant disregard of the other and says it is okay not to care about the plight of the other. When the message of Christianity simply, we need each other to survive. And my life is wrapped up in yours, and our futures are intertwined together. So there is no way for me to flourish fully, wholly, in a holy, sacred way without you flourishing and having regard for what you need. We must take care of self, of neighbor, of others. This is the fundamental message of our faith. To be sure, we will not be able to prevent all of the policy changes. We will not be able to prevent and to protest everything, but perhaps the most important and sacred work that we can do within our power and agency for this moment, for such a time as this, is the work of taking care of those in our community, in our circle, in our network. Perhaps the most important work of taking care is to create sanctuary and to protect it fiercely. Finding, creating, building, constructing a place where we see God and we feel safe and we are free. For me, sanctuary lives, yes, here in this place, but I also experience sanctuary, a place of care, a place of nurture, a place of growth. It's often right before the sun rises, as I'm just spending some time in my garden at home. Indoor, just before the sun rises, where I can just be grounded and breathe, free from worry and anxiety, full of care. As I tend to the plants, inspect the leaves, as I look for a new flower, a budding of the lemon tree, the lime tree that might one day bear good fruit. We're able to create sanctuary amidst the chaos, amidst the circus. We're able to take care of our spirits and our hearts and be grounded in the place of softness and gentleness and kindness. And two, care is communal. And all of the hype with self-care, right, can easily participate in a sense of rugged individualism that is too at the heart of whiteness. So the care of the self, yes, it happens here in community, together. When we turn to the altar, when we sing our song, where we lift up our eyes to the hills from which cometh our help comes from the name of the Lord. So taking care of yourself, about being deeply rooted in chosen family, deeply rooted in community that shows up for us and says, yes, we belong. That take my seat and we turn to song. Hymn number 130, in fact. You hear these words from one of our guides, one of our elders, one of our shepherds, Cole Arthur Riley, in Black Liturgies, prayers and poems and meditations for staying human, all too alive. She writes, for you I want more. I want friendship and romance and family. I want a community that will not destroy you. We want belonging that isn't always at risk, that isn't always being threatened. For you, I want a sense of self required to walk away, to forage for solid bonds. To be known is not frivolous, it's survival. But we will not survive by self-care alone. We will not survive by self-love alone. Who will hold you? Who will remember you? You who are something to behold. You who are flawed and mysterious and needy and good and loved. Belonging is not too great an ask. So find your sacred company, and may they find and cherish you. So I pray, beloved, that we will take care in the days ahead, very good care, that we would steal away to the safe harbors as we co-create sanctuaries of belonging where we can feel safer, can fear nothing, and feel more whole. So let's take care of ourselves and take care of each other, because the hymn writer is correct. God will take care of you.